Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to discuss on how to reassemble an FCR Keihin carburetor off of a Honda Crf motorcycle. I'm going to be installing an Allballs carburetor rebuild kit. This is the part number. I'm going to be installing an R&D Flex jet. This is not a necessity, but highly recommended. Tools you will need for this job are a drill, a Q-tip, 17mm wrench, a new or a good screwdriver. I like the snap-ons, trying to get this to focus in, but it has some serrations kind of into the tip. If you have any kind of wear, this one does have a little bit of wear on it, but it's actually just the color coating coming off of it. It's not the actual tip. Get rid of it if it has any kind of wear. Don't use it on a carburetor. This particular screwdriver is just a carburetor screwdriver that I use, and I will write the part number down because it's not going to focus. Also, a good flat blade, but it's got to be small screwdriver. Make sure that tip is good, brand new also. You will tear your carburetor up. That is the part number for that one. I'll also have it in the description. Non-chlorinated brake clean. You're going to need that. You're also going to need a polishing compound. I don't actually have it in a container that has a label or anything on it, so I'm just not going to show it, but like a wheel polish, like that pink paste wheel polish will work. And you're going to need some Allens. You're going to need a 4mm Allen and a 3mm Allen. I prefer the T-handles with not balls on the end. You need the flat. The ones with the balls will strip out stuff on these. For this job is a small pair of pliers. These are what I prefer. You don't have to have this exact set, but if you do like this, there's the part number on it. These are great for working on the E-clips on a carburetor. Other tools you'll need for this are, if I can get the focus, an 8mm wrench and a 6mm wrench. Now, if you don't have a fancy parts cleaner or an ultrasonic cleaner, you can clean some of the surfaces that you can see visible with just some good hot water in a sink and some dish detergent there and a soft cleaner. I'm just removing the surface dirt on the outside of it. I just want to make this thing look really good whenever I'm putting it back in there. Remember, people, just take pride in your work. You'll keep people coming back. It's the little things. Done scrubbing, you're going to want to make sure you rinse water through everything, and then after this process you're going to want to take air and go through all of the holes and orifices of this and lightly blow air to clear any kind of debris or any of the water and soap that's in there still that you might not got out. So ultimately, before you start rebuilding, you want to do that. A lot better looking than what it did look. So you're going to want to have an air blower. I should have put this in the beginning of the video, but I really wasn't planning on cleaning it up, but figured I'd go ahead and shoot that part. But a good rubber tipped air blower, that way you can get into the orifices and it seals up. Make sure when you're doing this, you don't have anything in front or behind you, because you're gonna spray stuff everywhere. So just want to make sure, get down and everything. Blow them out, blow the front little pieces out here. I know I went the other way with this one, but we'll go back this way. Now it's time to use this drill. This will be the only time you're using this drill, so don't use it to take screws in and out of the carburetor. You're going to just damage stuff. We're only going to use this for polishing the needle seat. Take your Q-tip, place it inside the chuck, then tighten the chuck down on the end of the electric screwdriver. Now for this, I did go ahead and go get some metal polish. I just didn't want to use the bag that I have that has no label on it. You don't have to buy this particular brand. I've used all kinds of different ones. Just the lighter the color is, the easier it's going to be to see whenever it's starting to actually take the dirt out of it, because it's going to turn from whatever color to a dark dark color or black or whatnot. But yeah, I'm going to use this, and what you're going to do is take your drill bit and you're going to put a little tiny bit on the end of it. Not really a drill bit, I guess it's a Q-tip, and you're going to put some of that on the end of that, and then I'll show you next what we're going to do with it. If your drill has 2 speeds on it, I would put it on the slower one. This is not something you have to do real fast. In fact, if you go too fast, you can actually damage stuff. So I've actually dipped this into that polish and got some of the polish on the end of it. You can't really tell from this because it's exactly the same color as the Q-tip. So I'll go ahead and get this camera set up and show you the next step. Here, we're going to flip it over to where the carb ball would sit, and we're actually going to be polishing inside of here. This is where your needle sits, needle seat or float valve, however you want to call it. Being in the parks over the years, people call it all kinds of different things. But you're going to take your Q-tip, you're going to place it up to the hole on that, and you're going to polish it. Go slow in and out gently, and try to work it around in a circular motion around the bore of the actual surface that the seat needs to, making sure you're going all the way down to the bottom. And as you're doing this, you'll see that your drill bit is now, I'm terrible here, the drill bit starts to get some color to it. The tip still isn't blackened up yet. I want to get down in there and get the seat where it's actually sitting. Let's see if I can get a little better shot here for you guys. So you're just going to keep doing that, and you're going to do it until you can see it starting to polish the inside there. Of course, it's going to be a foggy right now, but let's see if I can get it to focus in there. You can see there's no more of the gray surface. It just has the actual polish on the inside of there. So now what I'll do is I'll take my Q-tip out of the screwdriver or electric screw gun or drill and flip it around and use the other clean side and remove as much of the polish as I can. You don't want to get that. As much of the polish as you can, get it out of there. And then what we're going to do after this point is, now that the polish is coming out, I'm going to take some non-chlorinated brake clean, and it definitely is, it's hard to see, it's definitely shiny down there at the bottom now. You don't want to do this too long because you will take material out of it if you sit there and keep polishing and polishing and polishing, and then your needle seat definitely won't seat to it. So what we're doing, we're just taking the corrosion that has happened to this carburetor from the inside of it, and we're just polishing that seat up. And then you can take some brake clean and shoot it right back down inside of here. Make sure you're using a non-chlorinated. You still Don't want any of that hanging around. And then you can take it to make sure that nothing has gone back up through the system. You can actually go to where the fuel goes into it and press your brake clean, shoot it down through that until you flush any of the polish back out. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that now. I don't want to spray the camera lens with the brake clean. I'm gonna go ahead and do that and get this clean back out. When I'm finished, I'm gonna take some of the air with that same nozzle I used earlier and blow through it just to make sure it's dry and there's nothing in there also. Now at this point, it is a good idea to lay out all the jets and stuff that came in your kit. Double check with the jets that you pulled out of it if you still have that. In this case, I got a bag of stuff and there's multiple jets, different needles, all kinds of stuff, and some of it may or may not have went with this carburetor. So I went ahead and got this kit. I saw majority of the original parts that I still need in the bag of stuff that they have, and then with this rebuild kit, I should be able to finish this process. But it's a good to lay everything out and check your screwdrivers. Make sure they fit properly into the jets. All right, so you're gonna wanna get your needle, check it in the kit. This one actually is a stock one. Generally what I like to do when I'm putting these back together, if you know what kind of tuning you had and you've done a lot of them, generally I just start back at the middle clip, so about 3 up from the bottom usually on most things, and put your E-clip back in. And I'm using a little tiny pair of pliers on this, if I can get it to focus in there. But that little E-clip goes back over. Now I'll put it on the 3rd clip on there from the bottom and set that back up. Now that, if it can get it to focus, is correctly back on there. Now the needle itself, now that I make sure the E-clip is properly seated on there, I'm going to stick it back in to where it drops down into on the slide. Make sure it goes all the way down. And using my 4mm T-handle Allen, I found that this is the bolt that goes back in there. It's got a little copper piece on the end of it and a spring. And what that does is that holds the needle down into the slide. So now I'm going to properly install this back into the top of the slide and tighten it down. And it's a little difficult one-handed, so I'm going to shut the camera off and do it. Tighten that top bolt there, or Allen, in the top of the slide. Make sure that you do not tighten it down too much. I usually just seat it to where it seats, and then I just give it a little tiny snug. You don't have to crank on it. Next is get the emulsion tube or main jet holder, and we're going to put our main jet into the end of the tube. We're going to tighten that together using our 7mm and 8mm wrench. We're just going to give these a little snug. You don't want to tighten this too tight because this is brass and it snaps very easy, and you're using wrenches to do this that have a lot of leverage, so do not tighten too tight. Make sure you use the right wrench. 7mm and a 6mm and an 8mm for this process. Then we're going to take the main jet holder and main jet, and we're going to place it over top of our needle and slide it into the carburetor. Using your 8mm, you're going to tighten this down after you've seated it down with your hand. It's important to seat it down so you don't cross thread nothing before you just start cranking on it. You don't want to tear the body of this carburetor up. It's a very expensive carburetor. Same thing with this. You're not going to crank down on it real tight. You're just going to give it a little snug and put it in there. Next thing that I will do is the hole right behind the main jet is where your pilot jet will go. This is your pilot / starting jet, slow jet, whatever you want to call it. You'll simply drop that down in there, and then using that small screwdriver that fits into your jet properly, you are going to tighten this down. As with any of these, you're just going to tighten it down till it seats and then just give it a little tiny turn past the seat. That way you don't damage the jet or the seat that it's going down into. Next, we're going to put the little jet below it in the other slot. This one just drops down in there the same way. It's kind of hard to seat these ones by hand because it's got like a rounded tip on it, but just carefully use your screwdriver and make sure it seats down in there nice. And you're going to do the same with this. You're going to tighten it down till it stops, and then just put a little tiny turn on the end of it there so it doesn't back out. You don't have to crank on it, you'll damage the jet. I like to go over my O-rings with a little bit of waterproof grease. Keeps the O-ring from drying out for one. Also, what it helps do is keep the O-ring seated down wherever you're putting it to, so it sticks there. That way if you got to pick the bowl up or if you got to pick something up and move it around, the O-ring doesn't fall out. You don't necessarily have to have this kind, and all I do is just get a little tiny bit of it and I just rub it around the whole entire perimeter of it, and then I'll flip it over and do the other side. It's going to be a little messy, so be prepared, but this will help you out. You won't have O-rings sticking to the float bowl in the future if you ever have to take this thing back apart and clean it or whatnot. And then we'll just take our gasket and lay it over where it's supposed to go on my fuel bowl, and I'll push it down into the track. And you'll see that the grease helps it sit there, and there it is. New gasket in the channel for the O-ring, and it won't fall out if you flip it over. Yay! In the float bowl, there's actually a little leak jet. This one hasn't been removed yet, but I'm going to go ahead and remove that out. Again, using the small flat blade screwdriver, and you can take that out, and I'm going to install the new one back in there. You'll see that there's threads that are tapped into the fuel bowl, and that little jet resets back down in there. It's a good idea at this point too to go ahead and clean that out. Just go ahead and spray some brake clean down through it, and make sure that you have your diaphragm out, which I'm going to remove now too, since this one wasn't removed. And to remove the diaphragm, you're just going to remove these 3 Phillips. Be sure that you use a good screwdriver. Somebody has been in here before already and damaged these screws up a little bit, so it's going to take a little bit to get them out of there, but we'll be right back with it. And I've cleaned this. This is actually some corrosion. It's actually kind of pitted the carburetor up a little bit. It shouldn't affect anything. If you're worried about it, you can actually take a little bit of really fine sandpaper and put a little light buff on that, but I really don't recommend that unless it's super bad. I can rub my finger across this and I don't feel anything. It's just this coloring. Also, check your O-ring right here. If you have a new one, which the kit does, you're going to replace that now before you put the cover and your diaphragm, which looks like this. You're going to clean this off too, but don't use any kind of chemicals when you're cleaning this off because it can dry the rubber out on the diaphragm. And this actually, this part with the corrosion on it here, that side actually goes down when you're installing it back into the carburetor. You can take a paper towel and just, wet it a little bit with some water on the tip of it and actually just scrub against this here, and you can see as you're doing that it takes the corrosion off the sides of it there. The inner part too, the same thing. You'll just wet it and you'll just kind of scrub inside there and we'll start to take that off if you're worried about that. I just like making sure everything's clean. I don't want to make my work so nice I have to do it twice. Also, I'm going to put this new O-ring. I have also Taking this and put a little bit of grease on it and press it down in, and it should stay right in there. Same thing with the diaphragm. I just take a little bit of grease and put around the very edge because it sits into a machined portion of the carburetor. And before you put the cover back on, you're going to make sure you clean the inside of this too. And if you see the machined out portion right there, there's a square O-ring which I have put some grease on. I'm going to wipe it around it, and I'm going to stick it into that little hole. Try to get as much of the grease out of the center portion of it there as you can. You don't want to get that stuff down there, even though that's probably going to dissolve with the fuel if it gets down in that far. And once you've got that on there and you get the grease out of the center of the O-ring there, you can use a pick, or even the old needle jet that you've pulled out will also work. You're going to install it with the 3 Phillips screws back onto the bottom of the carburetor. And it sits just like that on there. And then we'll put the 3 screws in. When installing the screws back on the bottom, make sure you do like the rest of the stuff on this carburetor, jets and everything else. You just want to seat the screw down and then just give it a little tiny snug past that. You don't want it to put too hard because these screws are very soft and will be damaged very easily. This kit does not come with these screws. They are a special length because if you put the wrong side in there, it will actually push through the center of the bowl of the carburetor. So you want to make sure you have the proper screws to go back into this area right here. I seated all these by hand first. That's all you need. Now, you're going to want to take your 17mm wrench and loosen the bottom of the carb bowl and take this screw out, which you can access your main and pilot if it's on the bike from, or drain out the bowl. But if you can see, there's no ring on that there too, and you want to go ahead and replace that because that too is in the kit. And I put a little grease on that also, and make sure that this O-ring seats all the way down. It's possible, this thing has a pretty big shoulder. It's possible to install the O-ring and not get it all the way down, and then whenever you tighten this up, you can pinch that O-ring, and then you're pulling it back up off there to get the O-ring replaced again. So just double check yourself, and you'll seat this back down too. Same thing with this. You can kind of grab the carburetor. It's going to take a little bit more to get it. You probably won't be able to get it all the way down by hand, but once you get it to where it starts to feel like it's getting tight, just snug it a little bit. You don't have to crank it down. This is like white aluminum, so if you tighten it too tight, you're going to break it, and you don't want to break it off inside the carburetor and have to extract it out, or break the carburetor itself, because you're going to have to buy a whole one to get that piece. The next thing you're going to be doing is installing the float into the carburetor itself. Good idea to do, especially if you are like this carb and you just got it in a bag and you're trying to put it together. Take this thing, put it in a cup of water, and let it sit there for about an hour. Just make sure it floats. Make sure over the hour it doesn't sink to the bottom. Happens a lot. Not so much on these plastic ones, but the older metal ones you'll see, or the brass ones will sink. But it's possible on these too. The ethanol does damage this stuff up pretty good. Next, you're going to need the float needle or float valve itself, the float, and the float pin. So, your float has a little spring clip on top of it that goes onto this little metal slide piece in the center here, just like this. And then it'll hang, well, it should hang like that. Now what you're going to do is make sure you have your pin in your other hand, and you're going to slit your float and the needle back down, making sure that your needle goes back into its seat. And you can go ahead and let that just fall down in there like that. Make sure you can have your screwdriver at this point. You don't want to press real hard, but you can, to make it so that the spring doesn't slide off, you can actually lift up on the float and press that forward a little bit, and that will keep the little spring clip from falling off there. Next, you want to take your pin, slide it through, and make sure it goes through each side. And you want to check and make sure everything moves freely. See, that's kind of springy. Now, I'm going to put the spec in there. I actually forgot it, but I tried to record it while I was doing it. But you can actually adjust the float height by bending this little tip of metal in the inside of there. If the float height is not what it needs to be, in the description I'll actually put the what the measurement is whenever you put the carb sideways. But essentially you're going to put the carb sideways and get it to stop where it's going to naturally sit, and then you're going to take a measurement from the top of the float to the top of your carburetor there where the bowl sits, and it needs to be, I think it was, I want to say it was 6 or 7 mil, but I'll put it in the description. They actually make a tool for this too. I just used a set of digital caliper tools for this. Now that you have installed the jets in the bottom of the carburetor and put your float in there, you are going to install the float bowl back onto it. To install this, you're going to make sure that your accelerator rod is clean, doesn't have anything on it there. I actually pulled this back out of there and made sure, but it was already in the carburetor. And you're going to line that hole up with this hole, and then you're also going to line that piece up in the center in between your jet, and then you're going to just slide the bowl together. If it binds up while you're putting it together, it is wrong. It should go together that easily. Now I'm going to use the 4 screws that go back into the bowl of the carburetor. This screw is for a mounting tab for the idle adjustment. I'll probably have to remove one of these because the flex jet I'm installing also replaces one of the float bowl screws. But for now, I'm just going to install it in there, and then once I get that positioned on the bike or know where it needs to be, I'll put it in the correct hole of where it's supposed to be on the bike. Using your good tipped Phillips screwdriver, you're going to tighten all 4 of these bolts down. I like to do about halfway on each one of them first before I go all the way down. That way, if there is any kind of bind on the O-ring or anything, it doesn't pinch it. Also, if you tighten one corner too fast, you will put a bind on the bowl, and I've seen people in the past break the bowls doing this. So just kind of go crisscross. Some people might think I'm crazy for this, but I do not have the money to be buying somebody else a float bowl or a new carburetor if you can't get the float bowl. Same thing with all the jets and screws and everything on here. Once everything is seated, you're just going to give it a little snug down. You don't have to crank on it. I'm actually using my fingertips to do this, because if you grab a hold of it and go too tight, you're just going to strip the tip of the screw out. I'm going to install the R&D Flex jet now. I'm trying to get this stupid glare off of here, but I'm going to try to include the directions slowly here. That way if somebody gets this and they're not doing the whole carb thing, they'll know how to do this if they don't have the directions. Okay, so on this, if the spring, the washer and the O-ring is not there, This is the order it needs to go. First, you slide the spring on. Then you slide the washer on. And last, you put the O-ring on. If you have this in any other way, it will leak and your bike will not run right. Normally there is a jet that sits down in here, and that is the air fuel screw jet. That is what we're installing this flex jet into. And if you can see there, it's going to be the only opening that has a shoulder around it. And this is, I believe, let me look at this here. Yeah, this will be the front against the cylinder of the carburetor. What you're going to do is slide this in there easily and turn it in. You'll seat this all the way down until it stops. You should not have to take a whole lot of pressure on it. If you over tighten this, you will damage the tip of it, so make sure to seat it just a little bit past stop. Don't crank on it. Don't even do as much as you're doing on the actual screws, because like I say, you'll distort that tip, or you can actually damage the carburetor too in some instance. But I like to seat this all the way back down, and you'll see it's getting tight right there. That's seated. I'll go a little bit past that, man. And then what I do is, once I get it on the bike, I'm going to do this, but normally I'll just back it out once it's on there 2.5 turns and start from there once it's on the bike to start to adjust it. And so the screw that you will mount this to will be the one right underneath the filler nozzle where the gas comes into the carburetor. You'll just remove that one back out, replace it with this, and what it'll do is it'll sit in here just like that, which I'll show you here in a second. And it looks just like that after you've installed it there. Once you've taken this back out, it's a good idea just to go back over your bolts again. Go back in and crisscross, because when you loosen something up in aluminum, it tends to flex a little bit, and it's going to loosen the rest of the stuff up slightly. So just go back over everything, double check it. I know I did that twice, but for video, that's the way I did it. Install, this is the idle adjuster. It's going to have a spring and a washer that go on the end of it, which I have to find. So there is a washer, and then there's a spring. There's a couple different springs that are in the kit. You're going to definitely put this heavy one on there. It's the only one that'll fit over the end of this screw too that goes in there. Next, making sure you don't drop your spring or your washer off the end of your idle adjustment, you're going to thread it into the hole right here. This is your throttle where your cables hook up, and the hole is right there in front of it. Slides up in there, threads in real easily. This, I mean, there's not really, you have to get this on the bike and adjust it. So I'm just going to set it till it hits the spring and puts a little bit of tension back on the throttle itself, and leave it there for right now until I get this thing back on the bike. I'm not going to touch it. And now the screw that was left loose on the bowl, I'm going to take the idle adjustment, I'm going to stick it back over there. You can see it sits right here, and it has a little tab on it so it can't turn. And then you're going to put that little screw back down in there and seat it down. This also is a very soft screw, so make sure your screwdriver is good. I wouldn't recommend switching anything up. Just keep using the same tools. Tighten it down. Make sure you're putting the right one back in there. If you have it out, it is a shorter screw than the rest of them. So if it's too long, it can press into the casing of the carburetor. But it goes just like this. And then as you can see, when it's on the bike, you can adjust your idle there and your air fuel there. So my video messed up whenever I took the slide out, but to remove the slide, I'm not going to do it again. There's an O-ring that's on a plate on the face plate of this, and I replaced it. It looks like this. It's a flat O-ring really skinny. This is the old one, but new one's down in there. You release this screw, and then you'll rock this up, and you'll see that the little train, it's like a little train cart comes up. It can come out right there. So once that screw's out, it doesn't have any tension on it. You can actually rock this up a little bit, hold it, and then press back forward with this, and it will release those little wheels in there, and you can spin it up all the way and pull the slide back up out of there. This is the carburetor cap. It too has a O-ring. I'm going to put some grease on it and then install it with the 2 Allen bolts that go in the top. Once it's installed into the cap, it should look just like that. The cap Allen bolts are 3mm, so you will need your 3mm Allen wrench at this time. And this just sits back down. It has 2 little guides on it where the Allens go in. So make sure that you line those up and then install your Allens into there. I'm going to take this off of here. I believe there's an O-ring in here too. I don't know if it's in this kit, but I'm going to take it off and double check and make sure it's all right. But snug these down evenly too. Don't just crank one all the way down, kind of halfway, and then seat it like this. Oops, sorry, horrible camera person here. Again, these will just seat. Once it's seated, a little tiny turn past it. Shouldn't even really flex your Allen when you're doing it. I went ahead and cracked these 3mm Allens loose, and I'm going to remove the plate, and as you can see, there is an O-ring there, and there's got some dirt past the O-ring, so it definitely needed to be replaced. In the kit, you're going to see the O-ring looks round, but it actually shapes out to go in there. So you can use your little flat blade screwdriver. Don't damage the end, scrape that out, and we'll reinstall the other one here in a second. A little brake clean in like a microfiber or shop rag or something, and go back around that and get all that dirt and grime that was in there in that track out before you put your new O-ring in. And that's what the new O-ring in there with a little bit of grease on it looks like. I'm not using any kind of Permatex or anything like that on these surfaces because the O-ring, as long as the O-ring stays lubed, it should not dry out and should not leak. But you're going to put your plate back on the top there, set it back down, take your 3mm, horrible camera angle again, you go around like this, and start those back down there too, just like so. That's where it's seated. I'm going to double check and make sure the other side is seated first. That one's seated, and then I'll go back over here and just go a little bit past and a little bit past. And that is what the carburetor should look like once you have this body together. Of course, there's other things that go on here. This did not come with a TPS on it. Luckily, the guy's bike, they didn't unplug it and leave it on the old carburetor, so it is on the bike, so I do have a TPS to put back on there. If you do have one of these and you're going to clean it, if you're not good with adjusting the throttle position sensor on it there, I would leave it alone. If you move it around, you're going to change the position that it reads on the ECU of the bike, and you can have some real problems trying to tune it later on down the road. These are ventilation that run up and loop over the carburetor, and then they run back down to the ground. It's good to buy new ones. Check the old ones. These aren't there, so I guess I'm going to be putting new ones on this carburetor before I put it back on the bike. Same thing with this here. There's going to be some vent tubes that one goes down, and the other one, like I say, it loops up and down to the ground. And you're going to have your choke and your hot start is going to go into these two, and I'll show you which one that is here in 1 second. This is the choke. You want to make sure that the brass at the end of it is not corroded up, doesn't have any foreign objects on it or anything. And then you're going to take this, and on the carburetor you have two. This top one is going to be for your hot start on the bike. It's probably on the cable still on the bike itself. You're not going to have it separate. Then you're going to take the choke, you're going to push it into here, and you're going to thread it in. If it is tight in any way whenever you're threading this down, clean the threads out. Don't just keep trying to thread it down in there. This is a plastic nut and threads that go into your aluminum body, and it strips very easy. And this thing, I'm sure, is not cheap. I know it was usually about $35+ back whenever I worked for Honda. So same thing with this. Be very careful. Just get it snug down and give it a little turn once you got it on. Once you got it seated down. And this is a 14mm wrench that I'm using there on it. Once I get this thing to seat down. And that's it. You do not put very much tension on this at all. Make sure you check your function. Make sure it sticks out. Pushes back in smoothly before you put it on the bike. You don't want to have to do it twice. Okay, and that's it for this video. Again, that is how to put a FCR Keihin carburetor back together from a bag of parts with an all-balls carburetor rebuild kit and an R&D Flex jet to replace the air fuel screw. Again, if you like this video, please like and subscribe. Drop a comment down in the comments and let me know what else you guys want to see. We are going to do a video of installing this on the CRF dirt bike and tuning it. So stay tuned for that. Thanks and have a great day.